Okay, I'm now recording this meeting. So welcome to the Data Hub Tech Talk series. This is just intended to be a small informal kind of presentations on just interesting tools that we use to work with data. And so I'm Evan Williamson. I'm a digital infrastructure librarian here at University of Idaho. And I work in the Data Hub on Thursdays if you ever want to come visit. We now have the Data Hub down here staffed 5 days a week, 11 to 3. So you do send your students and yourself come on down and have us chat and check out the cool spaces that we have here. And so today I just wanted to do a pretty quick talk about a little tool called RAWGraphs and really try to kind of explain why I think it's interesting, why it's a little bit different of a niche of tools, and compare it with some other types of tools, and then kind of introduce some of these client-side JavaScript based tools and kind of some other ones that are out there. So let's just jump right into it. So RAWGraphs is free, open source, and browser-based data visualization app. And so we'll get into that in just a second, but obviously you can jump over and take a look. See what it looks like here, and we'll do a little walkthrough in just a second. So there's a lot of free-ish web-based data viz tools out there. It's a big market right now, and for a lot of different types of use cases, and a lot of it is really interesting sort of corporate businessy analytics type use cases, and there's a whole bunch of other use cases such as aimed at sort of journalists and data journalists, or maybe no code tools, visual tools for people who don't have experience with programming languages to be able to create cool visualizations that they can share in their stories online and on social media and things like that. And so there's quite a lot of tools out there right now, and they have all kinds of confusing pricing variations and things like that. And so there's a handful that I just threw out here was Google Charts, which is built right into Google Sheets, which is actually pretty useful. Flourish and Data Wrapper are ones that are really sort of aimed at students and people who want to, they're not necessarily for like data visualization professionals. They're kind of designed to be really easy to use so that you can create something and embed it in your blog or on your article online. And so they're really useful little tools to know about, but they have pricing structures. And then Tableau Public is the free hosted version of the really top kind of data visualization software that's out there. That's Tableau. And that really has this kind of like business analytics kind of mindset. And in that case, on Tableau Public, you can use a free version of the tool with data that's hosted on their site and is always got to be public. You can't have a private data set out there. But it's a really useful tool to know about and get some experience with Tableau, since it is a powerful and popular data visualization software. But with each of these and all of the other myriad of tools that are out there, those are all closed source, they're proprietary. And the other thing about them is that they're server-based services. So to do anything, you need to send your data over to their server where all the processing is done, and all your visualizations are ultimately hosted. And so that can be useful for a lot of cases, doing some pretty powerful stuff like in Tableau, but it also has some limitations if you don't want to be sending your data off to someone else. And if you don't really want them to be hosting your visualizations, you just want to create some kind of image file or SVG that you can go and put onto your blog or put into an article maybe that you're publishing. So RAWGraphs is actually a totally different type of tool. It's a client-side JavaScript app, meaning that all the processing is actually going to be done on your computer, actually in your browser using the built-in tools, JavaScript, essentially, that's part of your browser. So you're not going to be sending any of your data off of your computer and over onto their server, and they don't host any of your data or your visualizations for you. And so it's a really different kind of approach, and it's kind of nice to have that type of tool that's essentially this offline or little app that can run on any device without having to install anything, and yet is local, only working locally on your machine. It doesn't require the services off of some kind of platform. So instead, RAWGraphs is really just focused on being this very pragmatic sort of mini tool and a visual tool that you can use with this visual interface that efficiently can move you from your spreadsheet into a vector graphic visualization. And even when you get to that vector graphic illustration or visualization, you're going to export that as a SVG. And there's a lot of things that there's not a whole bunch of details that you can finish customizing with that SVG. But the idea is that you would actually probably do some data wrangling in advance of using this tool, using Google Sheets or Excel or LibreOffice or OpenRefine or something like that, or your programming language. You pop that data, that spreadsheet into RAWGraphs, do your little visualization work there. And then you're going to export that as a vector, SVG. And then you might open that up with a vector editor such as Inkscape to do some kind of final tweaking of, say, like the fonts and things like that. So I'm going to show you that kind of workflow in just a second here. But I wanted to give a little bit of background just to kind of like put this kind of tool in context as well. So the earliest versions of RAWGraphs was actually essentially just a visual way to use D3.js, which is a really famous visualization library that lots and lots of people use and lots of other kind of services use. And one of the things about D3 was that there was this gallery of all these examples with the code directly below it, so that you could copy and edit and just repurpose that code using your own data. And so if you go over there now, you're going to see that, here's D3. It's still a popular library. It used to be kind of the only thing in town. There's a lot of others nowadays. If you go over to the examples, you just have this gallery of all of these visualizations. And so you're like, oh, I kind of think I'd like to create, one of these sunbursts. And you would click on there and you can see it's now D3 is integrated with Observable, which is a JavaScript notebook online platform. And so if you're familiar with Jupyter notebooks for Python and R, Observable is a notebook that's based in JavaScript. And so it's a pretty interesting and powerful tool for doing some data visualizations and that are really kind of native to your browser. But D3 is integrated in there now. So now your example data, you have your example visualization and kind of the interactions that you're going to have. And then you can see the code that creates it right here. And you can actually just run that in this notebook. The old version was not quite as slick. And so you can still see what it used to look like, which I just kind of like. So you would click on one of these examples, and then here's what the code looks like. Here's what the JSON data looks like. And so you can see they're just, in this case, just generating some random data, but you could literally just paste in some JSON data into here to replace that. And then what the HTML was. So you really have this template for how to, thanks. No, you have a template for how to implement this fairly complicated code onto your website. And so really it's a great learning tool to be able to see the code, and then you really don't need to understand everything. You just have to understand enough to be able to edit the little bits to get your data in there and just reuse that template. And so these examples really made this connection of learning by experimenting with those examples and then reusing the existing templates. But if you wanted to do anything complicated in D3, it was actually a pretty steep learning curve. And you also can't just quickly move your data around between the different visualizations because of some of the kind of weirdness of the way that it uses the data. So it isn't super easy to just use as an exploratory tool. So RAWGraphs really grew out of that and tried to take all the visualization examples that were in D3 and just make a kind of easy to use visual way to create and configure those data visualizations right in your browser, rather than having to write the code to do that. And then their goal has always been, just to be able to do that visually in a pragmatic kind of fashion, and then get you the SVG that you can export, that you can then, go ahead and tweak for your needs, for your publication, putting on your website, or for sharing out, or wherever else you're going to use it. So I think of it as a really great tool for prototyping some ideas, quick exploration of some data that I have online somewhere. And I think it's a really good one for teaching and learning, because there's a whole bunch of learning built into it. So I'm going to give us a quick walkthrough of what it looks like to actually use RAWGraphs and why I think it's cool for learning. So let's see. I'm going to give you a walkthrough. So you get over to the RAWGraphs page. It looks like this. There's just some information that you can. Hold on for 1 second. I'm getting some Zoom stuff in my way. All right, there you go. You know, about it, the app itself is actually here. It's like I think it's an Angular app or something like that. And there's just a set of steps that you got to follow to start using it. The first is to get some data into this app. And again, you're not going to be sending this data somewhere else. It's going to be just in your browser. All the processing is just with JavaScript on your machine. So that's what I think is really neat about this type of tool. So you can literally just paste some stuff in. I actually find this really useful a lot of times. Cut and paste is actually a really kind of underappreciated interoperability tool. So you can easily go from one thing to the next. You just paste some data in. You know, you do your Control-C and then you Control-V right into here. It gets going. This is just use a file off of your computer, which obviously is handy. And what you're trying to get in here is some kind of delimitated file. So usually it's going to be a CSV, but you can use actually a custom delimitator if you want, tab delimited, or you could actually use JSON data as well. And in this case, and you could also use a Sparkle query. So if you have a Sparkle endpoint that you know, you can set up a query that would get you some sort of tabular-like data that it can load into your browser, or you can enter a URL from some data, either JSON or CSV. I wanted to mention this just as a generally kind of working with data on the web kind of thing. Is when you're loading data from the web, you'll often encounter CORS errors. So your browser is set up for security reasons not to load anything from a different domain than the page's home domain, unless there's some cross-domain sharing set up. And so, for example, if you wanted to use RAWGraphs and use data from the library's website, it won't load it because we don't have CORS set up to enable that cross-domain sharing. So a couple, so you have to be a little bit careful about where you're going to put your data that you want to use online. There is some really good options out there. One of them that I use pretty regularly is to publish a Google Sheet as a CSV. And this is different than publicly sharing the sheet to other people or publicly sharing it so that people can view it. This is actually publishing that sheet as a CSV that will be updated in real time as you're editing the sheet, so that plain text file is actually available on the web. And I think that this is a really great way of getting your data out there, because you don't have to rely on the Sheets API or anything like that. It's just this plain text file that you can hit on the web. And so I have some instructions there for how to do that. You basically just go over to Google Sheets, you go to File and click Publish to the Web, and then there's an option there to choose which sheet from your sheet that you want to publish, and then you say that you want to have it as a CSV. And so I think that's a really cool tool. That CSV will stay in sync with the actual sheet as you edit it, but it you know, without having to hit any API or anything, you still have this data available, and it has CORS enabled for cross-domain sharing. So it's really pretty handy. The other place to do that is to put it into a repository on GitHub. And I think that's a really good option as well. You can, to get that data out, you'll have to use the raw link. And so I forgot to kind of set this up as a demo, but so if we wanted to look at some data that's here, let's say I have this CSV, and I want to actually use this data in the visualization, there's this button here on GitHub that says raw. And so you'd actually copy that link, and you could use that in our as something that you could fetch. for raw graphs. And so that can be really handy if you just have a repository where you have your data sitting there already, JSON or CSV. The other good way to do that is to use GitHub gists, which are just sort of like one-offs files. And so you could go over here and if you're going to use a gist, I'm just going to grab, let me see if I have some example data right here in my downloads. Sorry, I'm going to grab some example data here really quick. So if I have so on our digital collections here, we actually expose all the data here, so I can actually just download that. And so now I have that as a CSV. And now I want to be able to share this CSV. So I'm going to say test data, and I'm going to .csv. It's important that you give it the correct file name. And then if I put my cursor down into this blank box here, I can actually just take this CSV from my downloads and drag it into that box. And as long as it's a plain text file, Google will just let it copy over, or GitHub will just let it copy over, and I can just create that as a gist. And now you have this raw link again. And so that's a really quick and easy way to get your data up on the web in a spot where you can share it and use it from one of these links. So I find that pretty useful in general. Just another random data on GitHub thing that I wanted to show really quick is if you have some GeoJSON, so I'm going to actually save this. And I go over on to GitHub again, and I create a new gist. So I give it the JSON name. I go over here to that example of GeoJSON, and I drop it in here, and I create a gist. JSON or GitHub will actually render that on a preview on a browser using Leaflet, and so it's just kind of a fun way to preview your GeoJSON to see if it's working correctly. So anyways, these are ways to get your data on the web in a place where you can use it with cross-domain enabled. So I think those are some really handy approaches, and they're kind of explained here on my notes too. So for right now, with this walkthrough, I just want to use some of their sample data. And I'm going to use this. They have a bunch of sample data available, which is really handy for teaching context. You can see that there's a title for it. They have a source for it, so you can go find where you got it. And they also have some suggested visualizations that work well with it. And so I'm going to actually use this Iris Flowers one, which is pretty famous. So now you've loaded this data into your browser. You actually have some options to change the parsing of that data. You can also change which kind of separators. So there's some options there when you first load that data to try to change the way it's being parsed if you need to. Sometimes that would be like if you wanted to interpret one of these fields as a date field and things like that, you would actually go in here and choose the different parsing options to be able to try to get that to work. And so you're not really going to do data wrangling, but there's some little options that you can do to try to play with this data. So then the second step is you get to choose which kind of chart type visualization that you want to use. And what I like here is that there's descriptions of each of them. And you go here, and this is what I think would be great, in the classroom in general. And when you're trying to remember anything about these visualizations and what they're good for, they have a little description of it, and then you can actually pop over here, and each one will actually have a whole tutorial about using this visualization and kind of, really pragmatic stuff about it, like why would you use this visualization, what's it good for, and just walk you through doing one with some sample data. So I think that that's a really neat thing that's built into this little tool, learning that's right there embedded in the tool. And so it suggested that this convex hull would be a good one with this sample data. And so we could see that there's a tutorial here that we could look at and watch to figure out more about this visualization. And then I've chosen this chart by highlighting it there, and I scroll down, And now we need to map the data fields that we want to use into the options for this particular chart. And so what is available here is obviously going to be different depending on each chart that you're going to use. And you're going to see that each one has these little red asterisks, mean that those are required for the visualization to work. These other ones aren't required, but add stuff into this visualization. And then you're also going to say it's showing which kind of data types are appropriate for that variable. And so this is really neat. You know, again, this kind of learning and understanding kind of built into the workflow of putting together this little visualization. And so we're going to just throw over one of these here, and then I can look here and just looking for a number. So I have the CPO length and I have the width. And then you can see that we've filled in 2 required ones. So it's already started generating a visualization. It's not too interesting at this point. And so we actually want to group them by a species to make this a little bit more of a meaningful chart. And so now we have this pretty interesting visualization of that data where we see that there actually is some sort of correlation between the species and their their width and length. And then on the side here, we can customize a little bit of what this SVG, the details of it. And so generally, let's say I want a legend in there. So now I have this legend, which is going to be a lot more helpful. There's some other options here that you can go through. Maybe we want our dots of the actual measurements to be a lot bigger so that it's a little bit more clear how these clusters are coming together. And you could also tweak the colors depending on what makes sense to help support the distinctions that you're trying to bring out in this visualization. And then you can, this doesn't apply in this visualization, but so there's just a few minor tweaks that we can make in terms of the sizes of the objects and things like that. And then you see that we can't change the fonts. We can't sort of rearrange it on the page because it's really just trying to be this very slimmed down focus tool that just does one thing. It gets you to this SVG that then you could take out of the tool and manipulate using a vector editor. And so then we get down here to exporting it. And so you give it a file name. You can choose SVG or some of these image formats, but I'm going to use it as a SVG. And just click download, and it's generating that SVG on your machine, and you'll have it in your downloads folder. So if you're not familiar with these in-browser apps, the browser is sandboxed, which is kind of cool about part of the cool thing of these types of apps. So it can't, the API of the browser can't directly modify files on your computer. So you have this language of upload and download, even though it's not actually sending those off your computer or downloading it from somewhere else. It's just on your computer in your browser. It's just JavaScript parsing that file and then JavaScript generating that file and giving it to you as a download. And so now we have that SVG. And so in this case, we might want to open that with Inkscape. Inkscape is an open source SVG editor, vector editor that's a pretty standard, easy to use, or reasonably easy to use. No vector editors are super easy to use tool, and it's apparently not going to open right now on my computer, but let's see if I can get it to go here. And so I'm going to go over and open that file for my downloads. And so here it is. And so now in my vector editor, I could go and grab this text tool, and I could click on this text, and I could change that to, some other font that matched my publication. And so you can see that now, because these SVGs are very malleable, now I can go and, tweak it to the standards of the publication, and I don't lose any of the quality of that output because it's not an image file. That's not a raster format. And so that's kind of the workflow that you would do if you're trying to use this as an output. But as I said, a lot of times for me, I would just use this as a little exploratory tool where I just wanted to see something really quick and see if it made sense. And then I might do this in a different, I might do this in Python or something like that. But I think it's a cool tool for just learning and exploring some of these visualizations that you weren't necessarily familiar with, and how they would work with your data. Having these little tutorials that really teach you about how these visualizations work, and can be applied in different ways to different types of data sets. So that's RAWGraphs, and that's kind of what I wanted to demo there. And I think it's worth going and exploring RAWGraphs. And I just wanted to show some other really quickly client-side apps that I think are interesting, and you can go explore these from the note, the outline here. Kepler GL is a really interesting one that's similar, except is for geospatial data. So it's very similar to using like a very focused version of ArcGIS, where you can load some GeoJSON or a CSV and that has geospatial coordinates on it, and start putting stuff on a map and then change the visualization. So it's a really surprisingly powerful tool that's, again, totally client-side JavaScript. There's a kind of famous data exploration tool called Dataseti, or data, I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's pretty famous. It's a Python web app, and you essentially can put a big CSV in there and then explore it as if it was a database. And so it's very useful for being able to explore data. And he's created a new version called Dataset Lite, which is actually running using WebAssembly in your browser. And so if you have some data set that you want to explore, big CSV essentially, that you just want to explore that data, this is a really good tool for that. And what it's doing here, you can see it's loading. It actually, WebAssembly is a newish standard that's built into browsers, that essentially you can compile non-JavaScript things into an executable that can be loaded by the browser and can be used in the sandboxed environment to run more complicated things. And so this is essentially has the Python app as a WebAssembly little application that can be loaded into your browser. And so now I'm not connecting to their server. This is actually just on my machine running, and I can use all the functionality of it. There's a couple others that are built for visualizations that are very similar to RAWGraphs, but are a little bit more complicated. And the last one that I kind of wanted to, I had a couple others in here that I just wanted to show you, just because there's some pretty complicated things that you can do client-side in JavaScript. So there's a full photo editor, Photop. The entire photo editor is just a bunch of JavaScript on your browser, which is pretty neat. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was this Starboard and Pyodide, which I think are really interesting, and I think might be one of the things that are coming up and is going to be the future of this type of work. So Starboard is an option to essentially create something exactly like Jupyter Notebook, except it's entirely in your browser without a server. And so how they do that is by, again, using WebAssembly to essentially put Python or a version of JavaScript node into your browser, and then you run the entire code notebook in that sandbox environment in your browser, and you're not using a platform. And so the neat thing about that is, it's serverless, it's static, it's sandboxed, it's on your machine. Again, you don't need to be sending any data somewhere else. So it's a really neat kind of concept, and you'll be able to do things like have a link to a Python notebook, export format on GitHub, and you can just open that up in your browser using this notebook that's on your machine in your browser, without having to hit some service and spin up a server in the background, which is what currently we do to share Jupyter notebooks. So that's a really neat project that is in beta that you might want to go explore. And I just wanted to bring out there as a neat, cool tool in this kind of genre of browser-based apps. So that's all I wanted to get to. And if anyone, just curious if anyone has used any apps like this, and if you had any other ideas of interesting things that you've seen out there, or ways you might use this. And so if you're on Zoom, feel free to like unmute, and happy to talk about it. Or happy to catch up with you another time. So that's it for the tool talk. Happy to have some more discussion with everyone. So there's a chat question. Let me grab my chat on my computer. I can't quite see it. So can the RAWGraphs render dynamic visualizations in the web-based portal, or can it only generate static files for export? Yeah, so RAWGraphs doesn't, it's not dynamic visualization. It's not for embedding, it's not hosting any of your data, and it's also not hosting the visualization. And so it is just for these static files for export. And so it's not that same kind of tool as like you're going to build a dashboard, you're going to build a dynamic visualization, or even a reusable, like let's say you built this with D3 and you have it connected to, you have it on your blog and you have it connected to a data set that refreshes, or even a published CSV. D3 would let you continuously update that. This is just a kind of one-off tool. It's just for generating this one little workflow. And those CSVs are static. They're, once you generate them, you're not, there's no source code for it. There's no, refreshing it with the fresh data. If you're working in RAWGraphs, you can actually save your project and then reopen it. And then if you are loading your data from a remote source like a published CSV or SQL Coral or some API that you can pull that data in, there actually will show up an option here to refresh your data. So if you have this project set up and for some reason it was like once a year you wanted to reproduce this same visualization with fresh data, that would be something that you could do. It's just obviously that's not kind of like its niche. It's not a live data sort of visualization framework. Thanks for the question. That's a good question. Anybody here?
What are the kind of the file size limitations with this?
You can get pretty big, and essentially it's going to be, there's limits on your browser has like a set of, it's somewhere like a gig or 2 gigs or something like that. So if you tried to open something gigantic, it wouldn't work, and your browser will just spin and nothing will happen. And so you're really just kind of limited by your browser's memory limitations. So yeah, it's not going to be like gigabyte size data sets, but because it's just running on your machine using JavaScript, you can open large things pretty fast in the megabytes size. But,
how does it store the project? Like if your computer crashed and
yeah, it's storing it in your local store on your browser, and so that your local store will be there for as long as that session is open.
Yeah,
I can't remember if it automatically saves, like it'll automatically save that, and if you like go back to the app, it'll still be there. I can't remember if it actually does that.
Okay. I got you.
Let me see. Let's go back to we refresh this. If we go over to open a project, let's see if it has my project saved. So it doesn't seem to have my project saved, so it's not like automatically doing that.
Okay.
But you can export that as a project file. And so yeah, it's a very sort of temporary use of your data.
Right.
So it's a different sort of approach or mindset to that, I guess.
What's the I guess the development schedule and this look like? Because they've been kind of updating it recently. Is it kind of just sitting there? Yeah,
you can. So there was an earlier version that was really sort of more D3 centric, and then this is the second version. You can go over and check it out on GitHub, and this version's been around for a couple years, I guess, and the big change was, I think they made it a lot more like building all that tutorials and a lot more help into it was kind of what they did, and building the framework that it's built on is different. But I don't think that there's like, you know, it's a pretty small sort of niche kind of tool. I don't think that like there's going to be like these giant releases of new visualizations built in or anything like that. It is an academic project, so you know, there's a tie to teaching and learning, and I'm not sure if we'll ever see like a giant update to it or anything like that, unless they just like, again, change to a new web framework or something that makes it work better. But like things like if you look at the learning resources, they've all been updated in 2022, so it's not just sitting around, which is kind of cool, which is nice. Any other questions online there, folks? Did you send the sign-in sheet online just now?
Yeah, I sent it to everybody.
I didn't get that.
Well, I sent it to them individually. So
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. All right, yeah, so if you can sign in, that just kind of helps us out, keeping track of what's going on at the Data Hub. Here's the link to the outline again, in case you need it. And feel free to stop by the Data Hub, check us out, and ask me any questions about this or other stuff. We have another workshop next week on what was that?
ArcGIS image for ArcGIS Online.
ArcGIS image for ArcGIS Online. So thanks for joining us, and yeah, hope to see you.